new jackets, new episodes. And let's get it started by delving into something new. A concept. Media litmus tests.
Given that you're rattling around on the internet watching a channel about feminist media criticism, you probably have some inkling of what the Bechdel-Wallace test is.
On the off chance that you don't know what this is, this was a test posited by Liz Wallace to her friend, cartoonist Alison Bechdel, who then popularized it to the point where hers is the only name associated with it. The Bechdel test.
There are 3 simple requirements. The movie has to have at least 2 women, those 2 women have to talk to each other, and they have to talk to each other about something other than a man.
And it seems simple at first glance, but then the nitpicking starts. Do the 2 women have to be named? How long do they have to talk to each other? Is it just like 3 sentences of exchange dialogue, or does it have to be a full conversation? And if the conversation at any point turns to a man, does that entire conversation fail? Also, if there's subtextual implications about it being about a man, like if they're talking about getting diapers or something and one of the babies is a male baby, does that mean the test is invalid?
All of which I think are good questions, but they also kind of miss the bigger picture of the test. Its entire point is that it's such a low bar to clear that every movie should be able to do it.
But it should be noted that the Bechdel test is a meter of representation rather than feminism, and an incomplete one at that.
How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is morally reprehensible and projects hideous stereotypes about both men and women, but it passes that low bar, whereas Gravity, a deep introspective look at a woman's psyche, fails.
Which is why everybody started making a test. You get a test, and you get a test, everybody gets a test, and let's see some of them in motion, shall we? I always called this one the Rule 63 test because the basic premise is as follows. Adhering strictly to a male-female gender binary, if you were to swap the character's gender, would it still work? Could they still do everything they do?
The most obvious point of comparison would supposedly be stuff like Ghostbusters, but that's more premise-oriented. The Ellen Willis test is more like that episode of Johnny Bravo where Johnny became a woman.
Obviously, this isn't something that can work with everything, and the answer is often no for a variety of reasons, but the best example I can think of is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Halfway through season 1, Trent, played by Paul Welsh, was introduced as a very literal male counterpart to the lead, Rebecca, played by Rachel Bloom.
I'm just a boy in love. I can't be held responsible for my actions.
Both Rebecca and Trent commit morally reprehensible acts, but arguably because of their gender, only one of them is seen as inherently creepy.
Rebecca is the protagonist of the series, so her point of view affects how the audience sees her actions, but the show is always careful to balance that out with cues like leaning on the fourth wall, visual gags, and characters like Trent to point out that the things she's doing are bad.
If you don't watch Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, you're missing out.
It's also worth knowing that the original Ellen Willis test was devised not for movies, but for song lyrics.
Play it.
I really can't stay.
Baby, it's cold outside.
I've got to go away.
But baby, it's cold outside.
We could argue until the end of eternity about the various aspects of the debate surrounding this song and context and tone and whether or not you're in on the joke, but what I think really matters is that whether we like it or not, a major part of the creepiness disappears when it's a woman asking a guy to stay.
Because we've been conditioned to view this kind of behavior as clingy in women rather than threatening as it is with men. And that's the result of the patriarchy conditioning all of us to mentally belittle women at every turn. Yay!
I feel like to really test this in motion, we would have to do a full remake of a movie where the script is completely recycled with only the pronouns and relevant nouns changed to accommodate the cast's new genders.
But no one would ever make that movie, would they? Somebody make that movie. Please. Please make that movie.
But as it stands, it's a nice little tool for thinking about the subtext and traditional norms and expectations that are associated with gender.
If you've heard of fridging, that's where this test comes into effect. The basic premise is, could you take a female lead from a story and replace her with an object that can likewise be ogled and then mourned the way the lamp in A Christmas Story is? If the answer is yes, you failed.
A sexy lamp does not necessarily need to be sexy. It can also be a mother, as is the case with Attack of the Clones and Thor the Dark World.
Oh, Thor the Dark World, the day I confront you will be a reckoning for the ages. Patty Jenkins will have justice. Natalie Portman will have justice. Renee Russo will!
The point is that the woman, whoever she may be, is not there to serve the function of her own narrative, but to exist as a prop for the narrative of a man. If by some miracle the female character is more competent than the male, she will have to be taken out either by death or by what Tumblr user Koella Squid calls Tupperwaring.
That's when she'll get benched right before the big climax so that she's not stealing any glory from the male hero while he defeats the bad guys, and then she'll just, come back at the end to make out with the hero or whatever it is you allosexuals do.
Like the Bechdel test, it's an incomplete monitor. It's possible for the same movie to fail and pass for different characters. Again, looking at Attack of the Clones, we have a sexy lamp with Shmi, and a fully realized character self-actualizing through allowing herself to have emotions with Padme.
Padme didn't become a sexy lamp until episode 3, et George Lucas est un tête de noël. The Mako Mori test was born through one of those rare bits of Tumblr dialogue that actually produces something useful during a discussion of Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim.
Like the Bechdel test, it sports 3 major criteria. A movie needs to have at least one female character, that character must have her own narrative arc, and that arc must not be about supporting a man's story.
That last one is a bit sketchy as to whether or not it still passes if, say, the end result is a romance, but the original creators were aware of that and said that this is more of a test to be taken in conjecture with the Bechdel test rather than a full-on replacement. And it's, still a meter of representation rather than commentary. Comprendre? No?
Sticking with Del Toro, a perfect example of this is Crimson Peak.
Full disclosure, I still haven't seen Pacific Rim. Look, I'll get to it eventually, but mecha movies really aren't my style.
Crimson Peak sports 2 major female characters, Edith and Lucille, both of whom arguably have their own narratives which are not about supporting a man. If anything, the men are the ones supporting their narratives.
Gold stars, Guillermo. Keep it up. Contrary to what you might think, this test was not created by filmmaker Ava DuVernay, but named after her by Marjola Dargis, a film critic for the New York Times.
This is a representation metric for people of color and whether or not they have agency dependent of white characters. Nadia and Layla Latif of The Guardian came up with a 5-part question to more clearly articulate the criteria. To pass, a film must have at least 2 named characters of color, those characters must have dialogue, they must not be romantically involved with each other, they must have dialogue about something other than comforting or supporting a white person, and at least one of them must not be magic.
Which is how A Wrinkle in Time passes. Yeah, you have Magic Oprah and Magic Mindy Kaling, but Gugu Mbatha Raw, Derek McCabe, and Storm Reed are all there and not magic.
There was an earlier version of this test created by and named for Nikesh Shukla in 2013, and that one requires that 2 ethnic minorities talk to each other for more than 5 minutes about something other than race, which is a little bit confusing. Shukla didn't clarify if this is supposed to be a total 5-minute conversation or if one can add up the runtime of conversations throughout the movie.
But really, both of these tests are about establishing characters of color as characters within their own right rather than forcing them to be defined by their ethnicity. That's how you break down stereotypes. This one might not be what you think it is.
The Tauriel test has only 2 criteria. There must be at least one female character, and she must be good at her job. This is another test where there's some quibbling hidden in it. The implication is that generally the profession is one where men are considered the standard, and the audience should be clearly aware of what the job requires so that they can know the woman is good at it. The first Thor movie is a good example here. We're told Jane Foster is a brilliant astrophysicist, but we don't get a lot of evidence of what that entails. We just see a lot of her driving around and spouting out science babble that most of the audience won't know if it's right or not. Sif, by contrast, is given time to show off her warrior skills and prove that she stands with the other men, thus establishing her badass credibility.
Jane's failure to pass this test in movie 1 was slightly remedied by her involvement in the climax of Thor: The Dark World, where she helps Thor save the universe with science! One day.
The Tauriel test also comes with a bonus question. Does her competence go out the window when she gets a romantic interest? If the answer is yes, she has failed. And this last criteria can also intersect with the sexy lamp test for your critiquing convenience.
Ooh, now we're getting official up in here. This test requires 3 things. A queer character, not solely defined by their sexuality, who is integral to the plot to the point where they could not be written out.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend both ace this one with ease. The latter is especially obvious since the showrunners worked hand in hand with GLAAD when they were bringing their first bi character out of the closet.
This test is more frequently passed on TV than it is in movies because TV is not so beholden to conservative international markets. And thus, characters like Valkyrie, where it's all coding, don't necessarily count. And even then, this test does have a couple of drawbacks.
Anya, Gina Rodriguez's character in Annihilation, is revealed to be queer in her intro scene, but that queerness isn't really an important part of her character, mostly because she's not a focus of the narrative. So while she does technically pass the test by being crucial to the journey of the story, her orientation feels like lip service rather than anything meaningful.
Yeah, I'm not done with Annihilation yet either.
The opposite can also be true. Tony Kushner's Angels in America is drenched in gay men who have distinct personalities and can't be eliminated from the plot, but given they're in a gay fantasia on a national theme, their orientations are almost always at the forefront, how it relates to their faiths, their relationships, their illnesses, their place in the world.
And even if it doesn't pass, which is up for debate, it still has a lot of street cred with GLAAD, which awarded it the 2004 Outstanding Miniseries Award, and it holds up as a tentpole of American theater. Just gonna quote directly here. A movie / game / book / play passes if it incites men's rights dipshits to boycott. Well, okay then.
The logic behind this is that if MRDs are upset enough to start boycotting it, then the creator of the work must be doing something right. The test is named for Imperator Furiosa from Mad Max Fury Road, but its applications can also be seen in the nonsense surrounding the promotional materials of Captain Marvel.
You know, the people on Twitter who keep complaining that Brie Larson isn't smiling enough in the promotional material, because heaven knows that when you're fighting a race of shape-shifting aliens who are trying to take over the Earth, beaming like a beauty queen is what's really important.
Ghostbusters Answer the Call also passes, but we've talked enough about that you already know my issues with it. Also, MRDs will literally lose their minds over the tiniest things. It's completely mind-boggling.
I also think that the Furiosa test is a trickier tightrope to walk than one might think.
Furiosa is one of those female characters with traits that are associated with masculinity without crossing into internalized misogyny.
It's the difference between A Song of Ice and Fire Arya Stark and Game of Thrones Arya Stark. At some point down the line, we will be having a thorough discussion about Judith Butler's philosophies of gender performativity.
The Furiosa test runs on the idea that the enemy of an enemy is a friend. And that doesn't necessarily guarantee a good product, but at the very least you can have some very delicious schadenfreude while you're watching.
This is for female characters who are designed rather than human actors.
This comes from the age of the 90s DC animated universe, when Supergirl and Batgirl once hung out together in bathrobes and towels, and the animators had to have their hair peeking out of the towels because otherwise they would have been indistinguishable.
You can kind of see this come into effect with some of the more recent Disney Pixar movies. Like, remember how everyone was complaining that Anna, Elsa, and Rapunzel all had like the same round face and big eyes? And then when Coco and The Incredibles 2 came around, there was more effort to put in a wider variety of facial shapes for women. This isn't necessarily a good test for me personally, but it's useful for any and all artists who are maybe worried that their character designs are getting repetitive. I just sort of accidentally stumbled onto this one on Tumblr, and now I'm fascinated by it.
The Ayla test is for media that has Indigenous women. It asks if a woman has her own narrative, if that narrative does not involve her falling in love with a white man, or involve her getting raped and or murdered.
There's a full Tumblr dedicated to testing Indigenous characters about this, and I just say go check it out. They also have a lot of really cool Native awareness posts that are worth your while. And it's better to learn about it from an actual Indigenous person than me. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, wait, no, wrong Sphinx.
This was created by an eponymous all-female British theatre company and markets itself as the theatrical version of the Bechdel test.
That is literally how they present it on the company website.
There are 8 components to this one, broken up into the categories of protagonist, driver, star, and power.
Okay, stay with me through all this because I think it's genuinely very thorough and very interesting, and we'll use a stage adaptation, Rob Marshall's Chicago, to test it.
Protagonist. Is there a woman center stage, and does she interact with other women? For Chicago, yes and yes. We can include this one literally, since Marshall uses a stage for the majority of the musical numbers, and with most of the cast being women, their interaction is inevitable.
Hurdle 1. Cleared. Achievement unlocked. Bare minimum for representation.
Driver. Is there a woman driving the action, and is she active rather than reactive? Again, yes and yes, assuming that we're taking Roxy as our leading character. It might be a little up for debate how much she is active versus reactive, since a lot of what she does involves asking for help and doing what other people tell her, but at the end of the day she does know how to take initiative and play to her strengths, which I say counts.
Hurdle 2. Cleared. Achievement unlocked. Narrative agency has been established.
Star. Does the character avoid stereotype, and is she complex and compelling? I would say that Roxy has the potential to avoid stereotypes and to be complex and compelling on paper or in the hands of another actress, but not the way Renee Zellweger plays her.
Okay, seriously, was she sucking on a lemon between every take?
My pettiness aside, she hits enough different tropes that I think we can safely say she avoids falling into any one stereotype and call her complex.
Hurdle 3. Cleared. Achievement unlocked. Our protagonist is a complicated human being.
Power. Is the story essential, and does it have an impact on a wide audience? Yes and yes. It's the longest running American show on Broadway for a reason. It offers commentary on the relationship between media and the law, has some awesome music, and means a lot to a lot of theater nerds.
Hurdle 4. Cleared. Achievement unlocked. Test passed. I like the Sphinx test because it tries to work more as a cohesive whole rather than talking about a bare minimum. It still has gaps, but I think we've seen by now that no one test is completely perfect. So the most obvious answer is combine the tests.
As you might have guessed from the name, the base for this one is Steven Universe. This test requires that there be at least 4 female characters, and that the work pass the Bechdel test, the Mako-Mori test, and the Sexy Lamp test.
Each character should pass at least 1 test, all 3 tests should be passed, and basically the more passing of tests you can do by as many characters as possible, the better.
Because every test they pass is a step closer to normalizing women as being equal and active agents in their own narratives, rather than objects in male narratives. Because, as I will call my future TED Talk, smashing the patriarchy doesn't mean creating a matriarchy. Smashing the patriarchy means eliminating the privileges and benefits that any one faction enjoys over others based on arbitrary categorizations.
Je suis la femme fictionale et nous ne sommes pas de choses.
Merci beaucoup for watching. Please be sure to like, leave comments, share, and subscribe. I would love to make these videos more often, but to do that, I need your help fending off the YouTube algorithm.
Thank you to all my Patreon supporters who make this show possible and allow me to keep getting bomb-ass jackets like this one. Look, it's got Leia on the back. It's so cool. I love it. If you want to help me get more cool jackets, or you just want to pick the next book, movie, TV show that I review, come support me on Patreon. Links are in the description. I will see you soon. À bientôt!